So, hello my Gunrunners, welcome back to AYYKAYY Reacts. I'm AYYKAYY, an interpreter, freelancer, an ex-conscript of Iran, and generally just a nerd. Anyway, this video is requested by a channel subscriber, that one guy. As always, thank you for your absolutely goated suggestions. I have not seen this video. I've technically never seen anything from this channel, Redcoat History. The video title is The Empire's Strangest War, Britain versus Persia, 1856 till 1857. So before we start, make sure to go over to their channel, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share to give this video the recognition it needs. You can find the link to the video in your top right corner right about now, and all the links are going to be down in the description right below too. Now this battle might only take in 2 years, but honestly it's a foster clock of so many things happening during one of the most useless kings we've had against one of the more or most strongest colonial powers of that era, the British Empire. I don't know how many points the video is gonna make, so I'm gonna wait for a lot of them and try to give you more information that way. Also, as an interpreter, I've had to read up and study on this part of the history, as talking about Iran without talking about the Qajars and their entire dynasty is just so hard, because they have a very big part in our view of the modernized country of Iran. As also our constitutional revolution was at the end of the Qajar dynasty, and also none of the Qajar kings were either kind or progressive in any meaningful way, but they did have some of the best prime ministers, like viziers, or their high councils were goated, but they almost never used them. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Let's just get to the video and start.
An invasion of a naughty Middle Eastern country. Naval bombardments, cavalry charges, broken enemy squares, and of course a few Victoria crosses thrown in. Get the kettle on, because we've got another forgotten slice of British military history for you today. If you're new to the channel, I'm Chris, and here on Redcoat History,
Hi, Chris.
we look at Britain's incredible military past, especially those unfashionable campaigns fought during the peak of our empire.
The Great Game.
Iran, always in the news these days, supplying weapons to Russia and Hezbollah, or arresting women for showing their hair. It's a complex place. A nation determined to flex its muscles and dominate the Middle East. But did you know that Britain has...
Due to its history,
when it was still known as Persia. We even invaded the country...
Did we know? Oh, I'm sorry.
Spoiler alert, we dished out a classic Victorian era beatdown. The Anglo-Persian War, 1856 to 57, is a...
Iran's Qajar dynasty was a weak, to put it mildly.
But today we're exploring this little-known war, the reasons it happened, the battles and the personalities involved. Incredible commanders like Gravedigger Havelock and James Outram. Stick with...
Okay, this is the part I might not actually be good at. I don't know much about the battles. I know about the political significance, the uprisings, what came after, especially through the Paris Accord, or was it an agreement? I think it was an accord that happened after this. I know about those, but the battles themselves, not really. So let's keep going.
Stick with me, because after this video, you'll be able to wow your mates down the pub with some of the most niche military knowledge on the internet. Okay, so why did it?
Ready for it?
Well, the Anglo-Persian War fits snugly into the so-called Great Game, the geopolitical chess match between Britain and Russia over influence in Central
Asia.
Persia, modern-day Iran, found itself caught between these two giants. Its location near British-controlled India on one hand, and the Russian-dominated Caucasus on the other, making it strategically very significant. Historically, relations with Persia had generally been friendly, but things got awkward when Persia started eyeing Herat, a city in modern Afghanistan. Herat wasn't exactly a prized jewel, but Persia had long claimed it. After losing territory to Russia in the Caucasus, they decided Herat was their consolation prize. Back in 1837-38, Persia's first attempt to take Herat failed.
Okay, just a point here. Herat actually wasn't part of any country at that point, because technically the countries that he would like to make sense of would be Afghanistan, right? That's where it shows it. In today's world, yes, Herat is part of Afghanistan. But at the time, Afghanistan was not an official country in a sense, as it was, I think, called the Emirates of Kabul, meaning it was mostly the city-state of Kabul. It didn't become the modern state of Afghanistan until after Iran conceded this part of the territory, Herat, and then agreed to see their sovereignty as this whole thing in the accord that happened after. So it's like putting the carriage in front of the horse. You're doing it backwards because Iran made sure the country itself was a thing. Although Herat wanted to become independent, it was still under Persian influence. History of Afghanistan itself is of course full with strife and of course wars with Britain. The first Anglo-Afghan war was, I think, a few years before this, and the second one was like, what, 20 something years after this? So yeah, it was not part of Afghanistan because Afghanistan technically didn't still exist. It was the Emirate of Kabul, or city-state of Kabul. Just a small point to add. Let's keep going.
Thanks in part to Lieutenant Eldridge Pottinger, a British officer turned local hero. It's unlikely that Pottinger was the one-man army he was made out to be at the time, but his advice and bravery during the siege did help the defenders hold the city and repulse the Persians. Good work. Fast forward to 1856, and Persia finally seized Herat, violating treaties with Britain. Faced with the annexation and with diplomacy and politics exhausted, the British declared war on Persia a few days later. In those days, you didn't mess with old John Bull and get away with it. But it's worth remembering the wider context here. The British had only just gotten out of the Crimean War, which had been both a wake-up call and a bit of an embarrassment to the British military and government. Indeed, it's been argued that the Crimea had dented the reputation of the British and probably helped encourage both the Persian War and later, of course, the Indian Mutiny in 1857. Maybe they no longer feared or respected the British military as they once had. So what would the British and Indian...
Yeah, the Indian Mutiny was very, of course,
armies in that part of the world,
prevalent.
The Persian army was a mixture of troops trained along European lines, alongside irregular, more traditional forces.
Yes, in part.
The regulars were a sort of quasi-European style, a mixture of tunics with headgear that had a strong Russian and Ottoman influence, and trousers that were more associated with Ottoman troops. The Shah's Guard wore an interesting uniform of red tunics with dark blue facings and white trousers, which must have looked rather familiar to the British troops facing them.
It was a... Sorry to pause it so much. It was a mixture of Russian and British military, as those two were the strongest or more perceived ones in the world. At that time, a lot of the troops would have been musketeers and cavalrymen, but also it was not an army as the modern army you would think of today. Technically, Qajar, the dynasty name, is also synonymous with the word of a fighter on foot, kind of like a foot soldier or a runner in some ways it would be translated. But a lot of these soldiers would have been ethnic troops recruited from the dynasty, from the family members, from all these big families and servants that used to serve them. It was more of a family trying to rule a country. Not unlike today's House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. You get the picture as the family controlling the state at the time. It does have some military power, but the military power is just not really that much, even though Iran at that point had a gunpowder production, making its own guns, cannons, but not still in any shape or form close to its bigger enemies to the north like the Russians or the British Empire. Also, the same type of imported military doctrines stayed the same, or at least were imported for another century or so, as like the first Pahlavi king who destroyed the Qajars, known as Reza Shah, was a Cossack or Kazakh brigadier general, meaning he used to serve in Russian-shaped military groups. And he even came to power by using those same Cossack soldiers to occupy Tehran and dethrone the Qajar dynasty, effectively giving them an end. And I'm saying all of that because a lot of the soldiers or groups that were in fights before the Pahlavi were always kind of ethnic groups loyal to the king. As you saw, the imperial guard ones usually would have been chosen from the higher society, being soldiers of nobility or commanders promoted from those families. And considering most of these came from the same ethnicities, they had this bond of this clan being in charge and everyone standing behind him, supporting him per se. But also a lot of these groups would have had good relations with a lot of different clans and dynasties, using their people and their soldiers as a form of defense and supporting their kings. Qajars were technically Turkic in nature. Qajar itself is a Turkic word. Also, the Qajars had very good friends, which were the Qashqais, also another Turkic group that were very close to the Qajars, known as good horse riders again, and were used as soldiers, I think, also in this war. So let's keep going.
They'd been trained by a combination of Russian and British advisors, so victory was by no means a foregone conclusion.
Okay, so let's take a quick detour, because when you're marching through the Persian desert, thousands of miles away from home,
Sponsors,
dodging musket balls and relying on the Royal Navy to get you out of trouble, you need kit you can trust.
make sure to support them any way you can.
I've been carrying this for the last few months. So a couple of months ago, I got sent this extra wallet when I made an integration and ad for them. And honestly, I've been carrying it ever since. I think it's brilliant. I love the way you can flip it up, get your cards out. I can keep my cash, can keep my tracking device, everything I need in here. And it's hard as nails. Put it back in my pocket, good to go. It's called the Card Holder Pro. It's RFID protected. It's as solid as a British infantry square. And unlike a lot of Victorian era campaigns, you know this is going to get you home in one piece. Extra have also sent me the Parliament wallet in onyx, which is a really nice colour. It's made from environmentally certified leather. It's compact, it holds up to 12 cards, and it's also RFID protected. Very important when you're on patrol in rural Persia and you don't want the local pickpockets scanning all your details.
Oh.
Then there's the Finder card. Now,
that would actually work in those days, but today's Iran is 90% cashless. Insane. Taxi drivers, Ubers, and all in between use card readers or online payments. So FYI, if you wanted to visit Persia, don't bring a wallet. You're gonna be so easy to pick out from a crowd from Persians, and knowing you are a foreigner that has to use our banking system as long as you're here, we're gonna know you have to carry a lot of money. So don't do that. Go to a bank, put it in a temporary account, and get a goddamn card. End of this PSA, and make sure to support them again.
The British Army of the 1850s didn't have GPS, which is why some of their campaigns took a little bit longer than planned. But you're not going to have that problem. You'll never lose your wallet again. This ultra slim rechargeable tracking device means you can always find it. Just use your device to check its last location on a map. I'm in the Apple ecosystem, so I just use the Find My app and it tells me where my wallet is.
That's kind of cool, actually.
If you fancy one of these for yourself or as a gift for the Redcoat in your life, head to partner.extra.com/redcoathistory. And because they've got up to 30% off right now, plus an extra 10% off with code REDCOAT, you won't even need to loot a Persian treasury to afford one. All right, let's get back to the story.
It has happened so many times.
Was swift. Within weeks, Major General Forrest Stalker, yep, that's his real name, brilliant, isn't it, led an amphibious force of about 4,000 to 6,000 troops from Bombay to the Persian Gulf. They landed on a point at Bashir, and they
the British Raj
nearby antiquated defences. A short, sharp fight ensued. British casualties were light, with one of the few fatalities being Colonel James Stopford of the 64th Foot. One standout moment was Captain John Augustus Wood earning the first Victoria Cross awarded after the Crimean War. Wood was a 38-year-old captain of the 20th Bombay Native Infantry. Hit by 7 musket balls while leading an assault, Wood refused to quit, personally killed one of the Persian commanders, and led his troops forward to victory. Top man. Yet while the campaign was going well on the battlefield, Stalker's personal life was falling apart. Harassed by debts, apparently from heavy gambling losses at the Bombay races, Stalker
What's a British gonna do?
His own life in March 1857. Now it's clearly a bad time for the British because Commodore Ethersey, the naval commander, followed suit shortly after. Command now fell to 2 veteran but underrated generals, Sir James Outram and Henry Havelock. You may have heard of them as they later won fame during the Indian Mutiny, aka the Indian Rebellion of 1857.
Just after this, yeah.
Outram took overall command. He had served in the First Afghan War and had
Just a small thing to point out. If you've been in this channel, I've talked about a lot of the history within World War I and World War II. I just wanted to point out in World War I history, I don't know which video it was, I did point out that the Iran's military in World War I was bolstered by the British after they had invaded the country to kind of use it as to give access to the British from Iran to the British Raj, especially after all these rebellions happened. As well, it was a imperialistic one. Just read up on what the British did in the rebellion after this. But as you can see, in this same war, the British used the Indians as a way to control the Iranians. So yeah, these two countries were always kind of like pitted against each other. And Britain saw itself as an iron fist atop both of those as to control and balance one with the other. And it was also kind of the point of the treaty after that this happened, because the uprisings from India was just so prevalent that the British got scared as they were like kind of occupied with Iran. Just as after the same things that happened to Crimea, they wanted to just fix the things with Iran and go back to British controlled Raj, so as to just like kind of put out the fires. Just saying, like, they did it for themselves, right? There's no morality in this. It was an imperial one. Also, they did mention a accord that presumably Iran had broken considering they attacked Herat. But also that accord was kind of written not based off of like the Soviets or British themselves, as Britain was trying to stop French people from trying to occupy Iran. It's just an embarrassingly convoluted war of great game between Britain, France, Russian Tsardom, and just way more. Fun fact, the French actually did manage to control parts of Iran, or at least had considerable cultural influence in Iran. Even today, as we want to say thank you, we can still use the French word merci as an appropriate response. It's just that prevalent. Also, there are many French schools in Iran, historic ones, one of which I think it was in Isfahan when I visited, and also some other bigger cities have more as well. So yeah, the treaty was kind of British bulwark or wall making, trying to close off all these interests from their competitors, the French and the Russians, at this time at least. These same people thought of Iran at this current time too Russian friendly, even though these people were the guys that fought the Russians, and they lost land to them, which was a big point of like shame on their sovereignty per se. Completely unfounded, but still it was enough for them. And they only wanted Herat part of Kabul and Afghanistan just to make sure they could instill a pro-British friendly ruler atop of Afghanistan, which their history is also insane, and it's something that they did manage to do for a period of time. Read up on the Emirates of Kabul and the nation state of Afghanistan when it started for more information. But yeah, a lot of small points I had to say. Let's keep going.
Recently been the British resident in the important city of Lucknow in northern India. Havelock was to command the 2nd Division. He was an experienced soldier who couldn't afford to buy his way up the ladder, and so his career progression had been glacial. It took him 23 years to move from lieutenant to captain, famously saying that he had been passed over by 3 sots, that's drunks, and 2 fools. He'd fought in Afghanistan, Burma, and during the Sikh Wars, and at 61 years of age was 8 years older than Outram. The 2 men and their reinforcements arrived in January 1857. They now had a combined force of 2 divisions, including a mixture of British and Indian forces. Unsurprisingly, the majority of the force was made up of Indian units, although these of course included some European units, like the Bombay Foot Artillery and the 2nd Bombay European Regiment. More on them later. Such notable units as the Sindh Horse, the 3rd Bombay Light Cavalry, the Pune Irregular Horse, the 4th Battalion of the Rajputana Rifles, who were known as Outram's Rifles at the time, and the 10th Baluch Light Infantry saw service. There was the 14th
Baluchis
Light Dragoons, who in 1861
were part
the 14th
Persian per se.
The 78th Highlanders, later
the Hussars.
Highlanders. The 64th Foot, later the North Staffordshires, had the distinction of being officially the only British regiment to be awarded all 4 battle honours for the campaign. Anyway, back to the fighting, and the plan was to take the war to the Persians, old school British style, inflict some defeats and hopefully bring them to the negotiating table and make them leave Herat. Outram hoped to defeat the main
as they wanted to control it.
City of Borazjan, where the Persians were entrenched in artillery pieces. But bizarrely, the Persian force withdrew despite having all the advantages of numbers, defences and firepower. Thinking he'd missed his chance for a decisive victory, Outram began withdrawing back to Bushehr. There was an interesting incident on the night of the 7th, when at around midnight some Persian cavalry attacked, backed up by skirmishers and artillery. They attacked the British rearguard. Now, a night attack is often chaotic, and this was no exception. But the Persians made good use of the chaos. They also used a ruse to create further disorder. As they charged, the Persian cavalry blew bugles imitating British bugle calls. They
this was what I knew.
Like ceasefire and incline to the left, and this was surprisingly effective at confusing the British troops. The 78th Highlanders...
As I said, they did like copy a lot of like Westerners, at that point British type, you saw the clothes and all that, they were trained by a lot of these British officers. So they were very familiar with even their tones as they would try to circle these divisions and try to mess with them, saying they were ordered to cease fire. So they would be easily captured afterward. It didn't work too much, but it did work in some of the first battles, as I think I remember it. Let's keep going.
Are said to have ignored the bugle calls, and it's unknown whether their officers realised the subterfuge or simply didn't hear or ignored the calls.
Yeah,
Either way, it
exactly.
worked out for them. The 20th Bombay Native Infantry, however, obeyed the call to cease fire, believing they were accidentally firing on their own cavalry. When the Persian artillery started firing, some damage was done. But luckily, despite the chaos, casualties were light. It was a timely reminder to Outram and his men that the enemy did present a genuine threat. They weren't a complete walkover. At dawn, the Persian artillery fell silent, and it was presumed that the Persian forces would withdraw. But somewhat surprisingly, the daylight revealed that the Persian army was drawing up for battle, and perhaps they now realised that they outnumbered the British. It was the 8th of February 1857, time for the major
Battle of Khushab.
Modern-day
Khushab.
About 30 kilometres from Bushir. Outram's force of 4,500 men faced a Persian army of around 8,000. The Persians had solid defences around a walled village and a well-trained force of artillery. The light companies of the British and Indian regiments were deployed on either flank and engaged the enemy's skirmishers successfully. They were aided by detachments of the 3rd Bombay Light Cavalry. Outram then threw his centre into
trying to flank them.
The turning point of the battle? A classic cavalry charge by the 3rd Bombay Light Cavalry, which broke a Persian infantry square, an incredible feat. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, to defend against cavalry attacks, it was common for the infantry to form up in a square. Several lines of infantry, all connected in a square shape, obviously, and each containing 2 or 3 rows of soldiers, like the ones in the images on screen now. With bayonets fixed, steady fire and determination, it was generally an effective defence against cavalry. But not today. Now, exactly which regimental square the cavalry broke is a good question. I can give you 3 different names: the Kashai Regiment, the 1st Kushgai Regiment of Fars, and also some people have said it was the Shah's Guards. But whatever they were called, the Bombay Light Cavalry broke through them, charged through the square and then back again several times, mopping them up. This not only caused chaos and mayhem amongst the regiments in question, but dispirited the entire Persian army.
Okay, well, between what or which groups broke, I would understand the 2nd and the 3rd one being the Imperial Guards. I'm not that sure. But the first one, which is pronounced AYYKAYY, they were the cavalry regiment, so they wouldn't be in a formation of infantrymen. If you were familiar with the history of AYYKAYY, you would know that they're nomadic people. They're very well known to be horse riders, and a very good one at that. So yeah, it would be one of them, but definitely not the AYYKAYYs, considering they were usually just cavalrymen. Let's keep going.
Soon the Persians were in full retreat, effectively ending the battle. British casualties were surprisingly light, with 70 or 80 killed or wounded, while it said Persian losses exceeded 700. An interesting aside, 2 more Victoria Crosses were awarded for this battle. Lieutenant Arthur Thomas Moore leaped his horse over the Persian square, only to have it shot out from under him. His life was saved by 21-year-old Lieutenant John Malcolmson, earning them both the VC. And one notable trophy captured at Khushab was a Persian regimental standard, adorned with a silver hand and the inscription, "The hand of God is above all things." Today, that silver hand forms the badge of the Poona Horse, a modern tank regiment of the Indian Army, descended, of course, from the regiment that broke the square.
They don't do that.
Outram then had to pause the campaign, but by March he was ready to continue.
That is actually pretty insane, not gonna lie.
Mohamera, modern Khurramshahr.
Please do not talk about this. Just a small thing, you do not call that city Mohamera, it's Khurramshahr. Mohammed is an Arabic name given to that city, and it has been part of really hotbed of racial undertones and dog whistles. Please, it's a Persian city in the country of Iran, the Persian state. Call it by the Persian name. It is a city that has mostly Arabic-speaking citizens, but it is part of Iran, or called Afro-Persians, meaning they're African Persian. This was also the city that Saddam Hussein wanted to take over and used as like the first target and called that their Arabs should be part of our country. The fact that there was massive amounts of oil never changed anything, of course. But yeah, you shouldn't call it Mohammed, it's Khurramshahr.
Shat al-Arab. Now, there's an important point that I want to reiterate about this campaign. It wasn't about occupying the country. Outram had
it was about Herat.
Resources or political will to achieve that. It was about pressuring the Persians to negotiate. Anyway, the
Yep.
British fleet, reinforced with specially designed mortar rafts, arrived outside the city on March the 26th and bombarded its defences. The Persians certainly gave as good as they got for a time at least, and did particular damage to HMS Victoria, which wasn't helped by the fact that she also ran aground and was a sitting duck. But the artillery still continued, and at 12:30 a shot from one of the ships hit the magazine on the North Fort, causing an enormous explosion. This led to other large explosions, and the Persian fire soon slackened. It was now that the barges full of redcoats were towed up the river past the now silent batteries.
Sure.
They landed without opposition, and the town was now in British hands. The
Yep.
battle was a complete triumph. Although Outram and Havelock had less than 5,000 men against a Persian force estimated to be more than 13,000, the decisive naval bombardment had destroyed the enemy's ability and willingness to continue the fight. When later in the day Outram dispatched 3 gunboats and 300 men further up the river to reconnoitre and destroy the Persian magazines at Awaz, the point was reinforced. This meagre force,
Yeah, another very big city.
10,000 Persians, which included infantry, cavalry and artillery, but they simply fled. That was when the Redcoat would still terrify your enemies. The Persians were thoroughly demoralised and had no appetite for further fighting. Unbeknownst to Outram, the battle for Emirate didn't need to happen. The Shah of Persia had already agreed to abandon Herat, signing the Treaty of Paris in March.
Exactly, yeah.
March the 4th, actually. But
at this time, the major army of Persia was at the city of Herat, the point that they were fighting against. The British did a sneak attack, but they came full force. And while Persia could take care of Emirate of Kabul, it definitely could not take care of the British Empire at the time, with the Raj at its footsteps, naval supremacy at its southern side, and with big cannons, by the way, all under the leadership of one of the most corrupted dynasties ever to actually rule over Persia. Historically, all the Qajars were either very cruel, exceptionally dumb and stupid, and bar none, every single one of them was an addict. Not making this up, they were literally all opioid addicts. The British fought the Chinese to force them to take like the opiums and opium wars happened. They literally didn't have to do anything to the Qajars. They were already there. So yeah, the Qajar dynasty itself didn't leave much to be desired almost at any points of it. It had a couple of rulers that were interesting to point out. I think I did mention it in one of my older videos. The first Qajar king was a eunuch, meaning he didn't have any children left, so his nephew, I think, was the one that picked up the banner after him. And the eunuch king, which was his title, was one of the most cruelest motherfuckers you would ever learn of. His name is Agha Muhammad Khan, and I've also referred to the next guy I'm gonna say too. I'm gonna pull a picture of Fatali Shah, the man who himself believed to be the most beautiful man on planet Earth. This was the guy that picked up the banner from the eunuch king. So yeah, pretty strong characters became our kings, sadly. And almost never were they any good. Let's keep going. It's almost at the end.
Remember, in those days, there was no cell phone and no email. It took weeks for those messages to arrive.
Yeah.
News didn't reach Outram until April, at which point all operations were suspended. With the treaty in place, British forces were eventually withdrawn, and the campaign was soon overshadowed by the outbreak of the Indian Mutiny just weeks later.
Yeah, exactly.
The Anglo-Persian War showcased the talents of leaders like Outram and Havelock, whose roles in the mutiny would soon make them household names. Anglo-Persian relations were soon cordial again, with the Shah of Persia even visiting Britain in 1873 and again in 1889. Now, a special thanks to historian Chris Bryce for researching and co-writing this episode. He's a great author in his own right, and I'll link to his books in the description below. If you want more quirky stories and forgotten wars from Britain's military past, then subscribe and comment and watch the video on screen now. I think you're going to like it.
So yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that. And if you like this video, maybe do the same for me. I hope it was informative for you guys. I only hope to give a bit more info on something already great. Also, he did mention a point about the Qajar ruler then coming to British for visits and all that. That is not a strong point per se. Hell, the Qajar dynasty itself was just very known for being a prolific spender. They would always try to go to European countries, try to visit as many places they could, and they spent an absurd amount of money on them. So much so that the treasury of the entire Persian Empire was just down to the last coins. So what they did do was the Shahs of Persia at that time asked other Western countries for loans so they could support back the Shah's very expensive hobby of going to these countries and visiting. Now, if you think that these visits were anything lower than the most luxurious things you would have imagined, well, you've imagined kind of wrong, because they were very luxurious. As one of my history professors once said, the king would have needed its own brigadier to just come with him, generals to be with him, viziers, ministers, people from House of Wisdom, and of course servants like cooks, cleaners, people that would set up the tents, and the entire family and the extended family of this king would have to go with him. And these loans weren't just happening like once or twice. He had asked almost every single empire that was a good one or a rich one for money, as the entire coffers of Iranian empire was just being emptied out. And when the king of Persia could not pay these profits back or these loans back in time, he gave away mining rights, rights to textiles, trades. So yeah, they sold out the people so they could go around pretending they're rich brats. Hell, when the last king of Qajar dynasty was dethroned, Reza Shah allegedly occupied the throne room as the king was just outside of Iran traveling for his own sake. The king received a letter from Reza Shah, which also I don't like very much, but he did do a lot of good. One of his most cool moments was this, giving the old king of Persia a letter to say, don't bother to come back to your country. What sort of steel gyros are hanging off of you to tell the king of a country, don't dare put your foot back in this country? That takes a lot of cojones, you know? Also, a small fact for anyone that bothered to stick to the end of the video, the Qashqai people that were mentioned a couple of times in this one, and I did speak a little bit about them, they were the nomadic tribes, right? If you remember, the Qashqai people are one of the two remaining groups in the entirety of Iran that have still nomadic precepts to them, meaning on the hotter months they would go through passing mountains into greener pastures, and as the seasons change they would still move their entire herd with their people, with their riders, all the way back to another green pasture, as the south of north of Iran have different climates, of course. The only other nomadic group that still has those nomadic precepts still moving up and down the country with their herds and all that are the Bakhtiaris, namely, yours truly is one of them. The name of the state or province that I grew up in is the Bakhtiari province. These nomadic tribes have very good relations with the other parties, as we still have one of the treaties we have signed for more than a century, that if any of these nomadic groups, at that time 4 or 5 groups, would fall into that category, were under attack, the other ones would rise up to help and defend them, but only if the attack was directed at the nomad group because of their being nomad groups. Not like this one where the nomad group tried to serve the bigger imperial army, you know? Hell, that treaty is still to this day and active technically, but out of the 6 or 5 different nomad groups, only 2 remain, and one is us Bakhtiaris and the other one Qashqais. Also technically my people are way older than they are, because as I've kind of pointed out, Qashqais are Turkic and they came to Iran during the Turkic migration before the Mongols. Hell, the Qashqais, even although being Turkic in nature, fought against the Mongols, same way the Bactrians did, same way a lot of different groups did. They saw themselves, even today, Iranian first and Persian Turkic. Yeah, that's a thing. My group, the Bakhtiaris, technically are descendants of Lurs, which themselves are descendants of Kurdish people, and Kurdish people are an Iranic group. So yeah, we are Persian all in all, and even like in the stone carvings of Persepolis, there are depictions of my people with my type of ethnic cloth, even on those stone carvings. That way predates the Turkic migration and all that. So we are technically older than them, but we have more in common than we have in difference. My province is one of the places that the Qashqais live, and I've met a number of them. Just a cool tidbit. Anyway, that was all for this video. Hope this was informative enough. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to Chris for making this video, and check out his channel, Redcoat History. I know I ranted a long while for this one, but to give more in context of history and stuff I am familiar with, which this one is history of my country, to kind of legitimize my own channel, as it is a reaction channel and I need to at least add something to it, right? And in this one I did have some things I knew, so I did add something to it. Oh yeah, also thanks to that one guy for the suggestion of this video, and if you have something you'd want me to see, comment down below. Thanks for watching, see you in the next video.